It's always been insanely difficult for companies to compete in the handheld gaming market, and Nintendo's been on top of it all since the Game Boy in 1989. Other companies have tried their hand in this market, but they always fell short and never made much money. Plus, the games just weren't as good as what Nintendo was offering. But there was one system that would have been deserving of success, that being the Neo Geo Pocket and Pocket Color. This obscure console was created by SNK. They were known for developing a lot of arcade games back in the day, such as Fatal Fury and Metal Slug. This handheld was actually quite powerful for the time. It was 16-bit, sported a wider color palette, and boasted much smoother animations. It was a really neat handheld that unfortunately went under the radar. The Neo Geo Pocket has certainly gained a cult following over the years, thankfully, and I think that's due in part to one of the Sonic games released for it. I think most people found out about the console because of this game. At least, that's how it was for me. I'd constantly see the sprite artwork of this game online and thought it looked really cool. I even made my own out of beads a while back. But now I've given it a playthrough and I'm ready to talk about it. This is Sonic the Hedgehog Pocket Adventure. Now, this isn't the first time Sonic has spun his way onto a handheld. He had a ton of entries on Sega's first and only handheld, the Game Gear. I don't particularly care for these games all that much. I find them kinda uninteresting and not that much fun. The level design isn't the best and everything feels a bit off due to the inferior hardware. So I was curious to see if Sonic Pocket Adventure stood above the Game Gear titles. Well, let's just say I was not disappointed. I think of this game as a celebration of the Genesis titles. It borrows a bunch of elements from those games and rolls it into one. All of the levels are ripped straight from Sonic 1 and 2. You have, not Green Hill, not Chemical Plant, not Casino Night, and not Aquatic Ruin. Although they kept Sky Chase the same. The final level is neat though, since it looks like Scrap Brain but has gimmicks from Metropolis Zone. The game also calls back to other things like the Knuckles fight in Sonic 3, Palm Tree Panic, Mecha Sonic, Sonic CD, and the whole soundtrack is just a chiptune version of Sonic 3's soundtrack. But hey, I'm not complaining about that. While it is disappointing that it just reuses existing zones, it's not necessarily a bad thing. The levels are still fun and well designed. I never noticed any glaring issues during my playthrough. This is a Sonic game through and through. No compromises were made necessarily, and everything works as it should. The pace is brisk and the level design, while sometimes unoriginal, is very solid and fun. One thing I often hear people complain about with older handheld games are visibility issues. A lot of these older portable games had very zoomed in cameras so the game could have a bit more detail. This results in you having to make a quote-unquote leaps of faith a lot of the time. But in Sonic Pocket Adventure, that's not an issue at all, which is quite nice for a game like this. And speaking of visibility, let's talk about the graphics. I think this game has a fantastic visual style. It has a simple but striking look to it that's reminiscent of Mega Man in a way. I vastly preferred this minimalist art style over the Game Gear titles. Those really tried to replicate the Genesis style and are more detailed, but I don't know, I just like the cleaner look of Pocket Adventure more. Like I mentioned earlier, the sprite work is great too. Sonic looks really good and so does everyone else. I think the bold outlines really do it for me. It makes the characters pop out a whole lot more. The one thing that surprised me the most were the controls. I was expecting them to be kinda off and a bit clunky, but boy was I wrong. This game feels pretty dang similar to the Genesis games. I became adjusted to the controls quite fast. Jumping was great, Sonic felt as quick as he should, and the physics were almost one-to-one. The only issue I had with the controls was that when landing on the ground after a jump, Sonic tends to slide around quite a bit, so be aware of that. But other than that, Pocket Adventure feels great to play. I guess I didn't really know of just how powerful this console was, so I was surprised with how smooth it felt. This game also has some side content. You may have noticed some of these yellow rhombuses scattered about the zones. These are actually puzzle pieces that are used in a separate minigame. I don't know if this is really a great reward, but hey, it's there if you're interested. There's also Sonic 2-esque multiplayer here as well. There are two modes, Sonic Rush and Get the Rings. To play these, you would hook up two Neo Geo Pockets together via a link cable to play. One player controls Sonic and the other controls Tails. I don't know much about this mode and couldn't test it, so I can't really criticize it. But from what I can tell, it looks solid enough. It would have been nice back in the day, provided you knew anyone else with the Neo Geo Pocket Color, which was, nobody. I think what's most redeeming about this game is that, aside from the lower res graphics, You wouldn't realize that you're playing a handheld Sonic game. The level design, the music, the controls, it's all here and accounted for. This is a very solid Sonic game that any fan should try out. This is definitely one of the most underrated games I've played in a while. Sure, it solely relies on past elements to make up the game, but again, I don't see that as much of a problem. A lot of people view Pocket Adventure as a transitional game of sorts, going from classic to adventure era Sonic. The Hedgehog himself sports his classic design, but he also has the green eyes. Eggman even ends up wearing his modern attire at the end of the game. If you have an hour to kill one day and want a good classic Sonic experience, then definitely check this game out. While it is pretty simple and is really just a remake of Sonic 2, it's still a very fun time. I mean, I can never go wrong with Sonic 2, so it would be hard to screw up. Definitely give this gem a try if you ever get the chance. I highly recommend it. Hey, wait a minute, I enjoyed myself more with this than Sonic 3, what the f***?